Hi, how are you? Welcome to the LAFS podcast. I'm here with my friend, Karla Martinez, the head of editorial content for Vogue Latin America and Mexico. And we are also celebrating the 25 years of Vogue.
Hola. Hi, everyone. Hi, Estefanía.
Thank you. We're here in New York. She's wrapping up Fashion Week, and we're here doing great interviews with people that inspire us. Karla, you've been at Vogue. Actually, it's interesting. You've been at Vogue around the same time when I was thinking about putting together LAFS. I think you had just moved to Mexico City from New York. Karla used to work in New York.
8 years ago. 8 years ago. And I started 7.5 years ago.
We put it together 7 years ago.
Yes.
And I remember I asked, we were in Paris. I was like crashing your room and I asked you, Karla, what do you think of this idea? And you were like, great, if you can pull it through. Anyways, and you've been a huge supporter of LAFS. We became your media partner for the first 2 years, which was instrumental launching LAFS. And before that, you did a career in New York working for prestigious magazines like W, T Magazine, Interview,
Vogue where
USA.
You were an intern.
Karla was also my first boss. Well, technically, she was kind of my first boss, but even if she didn't hire me, I ended up really working for her.
I was a lot of people's first boss that are very successful. I was Ricky's boss, Ricky DeSole, you, this girl, Danielle Nakmani, who's a big stylist, Nora Milch, the fashion director at W, Courtney Weinblatt, who owns Cesta Collective. Yeah. And I had hundreds of interns. You were my intern.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And it was good times to be at a magazine in New York, I think.
Yeah.
Also.
I think in that kind of stage, I think it was really interesting.
It was like 2002, 2000.
No, 2004, 2005.
No.
2004.
I started working at Vive in 2003.
Really? No, because my dad died in 2003 and you came that summer.
So 2003.
Yeah.
So so many changes have happened in the fashion industry and also in Latin America. You've been super instrumental of putting a big emphasis and highlighting Latin America in the global stage and giving real opportunities to so many people in so many ways. You got to the magazine and so much has changed. How was that when you walk me through when you get to Mexico, you had never worked for Latin America. You had never worked for
I never worked in Mexico. I never lived in Mexico. And everyone kept saying, oh, you're moving back. I'm like, not really. It's not really back. I'm moving too. And I think it's very different to move countries, first of all, and then to start working in a professional environment is completely different. And I think I was so used to always worked in New York and having everything be really fast paced. And my husband told me, it's going to be really different for you. I want to make sure that this is okay with you because, in New York, it's kind of like working for finance in New York is not the same as working for in finance in Mexico. It's the same as the fashion industry. You're kind of at the top of the pyramid in a way. You have access to so many designers, to so many things. And in Mexico, it's really, you could say that luxury doesn't have the years of being established as it does in New York. So when I first arrived in Mexico, there were a few, obviously the big designers, Louis Vuitton, Prada, Dior, those designers that were already in Mexico. But then more and more designers started coming, opening stores. Also just the rhythm of fashion was not where it was. And then I think I started in 2016. I think in 2017, it started picking up again. And I think people really were not afraid to start their lines, whether it be fashion or home or design. I think that's one of the things is that's good about Mexico is that, everything here in New York is very expensive. So it's very difficult to start, your own line. In Mexico, it's a little bit easier in a way. And so I noticed that I think fashion really started to change in 2016, 17. I think in large part because of Johanna. I always say that.
I emphasize a lot of Johanna Ortiz and Moda. I think Moda giving a lot of opportunities through trunk shows. It's harder for a big department store to also place a a PO
Yes.
to a really small emerging brand, but giving them a trunk show opportunity was easier back then, right?
Exactly.
So
it was
I
a new
think
model.
It was a new model, and it really was a change maker for so many smaller brands.
And I think Johanna kind of introduced this sensibility. I was talking about it with Jose Criales from Vogue and Laia, and we were saying that, you know, she really took this idea of being inspired because, you know, obviously with respect to Carolina Herrera and Oscar de la Renta, there was kind of a European inspiration. And I think Johanna really emphasized those Latin
flavor
roots and that Latin
she came with ruffles.
essence of, you know, Latinas. And I think I think she inspired a lot of brands to say, like, she can do it. I also want to note that, and I always tell this to Johanna, people think that she started in 2014 and she did not start in 2014. She started 10 years before that.
18 years before,
yeah.
Imagine.
So
she started with bathing suits.
Exactly. And so I think she worked to a place where she was ready to go to the US. And I think that was happening at the same time. And I also think, you know, not just from a designer point of view, but from a talent point of view, the way you say, and you're right, that Moda was instrumental in offering designers trunk shows. I think Netflix really opened people's mind to different talent and to different markets, and how everyone became, you know, obsessed with Squid Games, which was a Korean show. The same thing happened with La Casa de las Flores, Luis Miguel, you know, all these shows that highlighted that people, you know, were watching all over the world. And then they became familiar with, you know, someone like Diego Boneta or
pop culture. And of course.
I mean, Diego's a global star, but he really became global, I think, with Luis Miguel.
For sure. Yeah.
Right?
Also, then so much things have changed, right? Also social media, you know, social media has been instrumental, you know, then you have like a Johanna Ortiz success story, and then that inspired the whole global market to be like, I wonder what else is out there.
Yeah.
So that inspires so many younger designers from Mexico, from Colombia, from Peru, from all over the world to be like what you just said, I could do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, the risk factor, just because life is less expensive, and I don't know, I think oftentimes it's a good and a bad thing. You know, in Mexico, we have a lot of informal companies because it's really annoying to become a formal company. But I always emphasize that to people. You have to become formal, whether you sell cakes, flowers, or dresses. And that's something that I think has changed, and people are saying, okay, I want to become incorporated. I want to do this. I have plans, just more well thought out.
So everyone is celebrating right now 25 years of Vogue. You moved to Mexico. We were just talking about that. And what was some of the things that you, as an editor, you said, I want to have some changes and have the company and the magazine evolve under your time? Like, what are some of those key things that you started noticing when you first moved to Mexico and started working for Vogue, that wanted to adapt to this Karla era?
Right. It's interesting because I didn't have like any sort of strategic plan, but I remember talking to one of my former bosses, Carl Templer, who was a stylist and, you know, someone I really respect. And, you know, I said, we were talking about photographers, and it's a very hard industry. You know, people don't, you know, the retail side is difficult. The editorial side is difficult. You face a lot of, no, I don't want to work for Vogue Mexico. I think everyone thinks that you say Vogue and like the doors to the kingdom open in terms of like, okay, I can call Steven Meisel and he'll do the next shoot for me. And it doesn't work like that. That's a whole other conversation. But I remember speaking to Carl about what I wanted to do. And he said, you need to think about what your Vogue is going to stand for. You need to think about, you know, what do you want the legacy to be? Italian Vogue is fashion and an observation on culture and what's happening at the moment, like the famous plastic surgery shoot, the oil spill shoot, you know, those things. French Vogue is, you know, very fashion, glamour. American Vogue is also, you know, Hollywood, politics, culture, etc. Like what's your message? And I, didn't know what he meant by that in the beginning. I said, well, I just, I'm excited to do a fashion magazine. But at the same time, I started noticing that there were all these, Dominican models on the runway, Mexican models, different Colombian girls. And that really made me excited. And I was like, I'm happy that I get to see, someone. It's always exciting. Like when you see, the first time you saw Salma Hayek on the big screen, you're like, oh my God, someone that's Mexican. And I think the same happened in fashion. And so I was excited to see those girls. And I remember seeing 10 Dominican girls at Valentino, like all Afro-Dominican, not white girls. And I said, we have to do something. We absolutely must document this moment. And we shot Linnazy for the cover, and Linnazy came out with her natural Afro hair. And it was the first time she said that Dominican women had seen a Dominican model on the cover of a magazine without having her hair straightened and burned and, all this process that it is to be stereotypically beautiful with beautiful long hair. And she said that really changed her. And I think when she said that to me, I said, I think this is the direction we have to go. I think we really have to stop thinking about the big kind of Instagram moment, because I wasn't getting Bella. I wasn't getting Gigi. I was getting a famous kind of all-American girl that her agency was getting something out of, but I wasn't. And I felt like it was a means to their end, but not a means to my end. And so we started shooting more Latinas and girls that weren't really represented in magazines. And I always tell Linnazy that her agent, even the agent, gave me a hard time to shoot Linnazy. They wouldn't give her to me right away. And
Why?
it's this whole fashion politics, because they want the girls to do Japan and Asia first, and then maybe Europe, because obviously Japan and Asia is where all the big Asian beauty contracts are. And, that's where a lot of the beauty brands make a lot of money. And so they need, they want that market first, and then US. And no, US is last because they don't really shoot models on covers. Then it's Europe, and then Mexico. And that was really hard to understand. And I think it still happens. It's gotten a little better, but it's still kind of this hierarchy.
So I was about to ask that. Since you started highlighting all of these girls, and in such an amazing way, you've shown all these creative agencies around the world, and you've told everyone in the world how you could put Jalitza in the cover and create the biggest impact worldwide. Have you noticed that now some of the people that maybe at the beginning didn't want to work with you guys are now very open about it?
I mean, yes, definitely. I think, the way that has changed, I think there's always still kind of this hierarchy with Vogues. I love this Latin photographer that always says no to shoot a cover. I think you know him. And, I don't know if that's just the agent. I don't know what it is, but yes, for sure, there have been people, and, we have a big November cover coming out with a very famous, or very soon to be famous, probably Oscar nominated actress. And when I first asked people, do you want to shoot her? I got a lot of no's. And then there was an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago. And even my old boss called me, who's a stylist, was like, I think I should have said yes. And that happens a lot. But, I think the person that does take on that project is excited and super grateful. And in this case, it was Camila Falquez, a photographer who's Colombian parents, born in Mexico, grew up in Spain. She's really amazing. And I think she really understood the subject. And one of the girls in my office, Maria Jose, was like, what about Camila? And I was like, why didn't I think of that? That's why I love surrounding myself by very smart people that are on it. And we shot her, and yeah, I mean, probably the person that said no will say, damn, why didn't I do that?
Of course. So celebration of the 25 years of Vogue and Latin America, right? The celebration of both of them. What is the vision and the differentiation of each of the magazines? Because I think for many of the people that are listening to us, explain to me the difference between one or the other. I mean, obviously it sounds like common sense, but as magazines have evolved in the past few years, how do you stay true to the identity of each of the magazines, adapting to all the changes that are happening around the world and in Latin America, and focusing on this very brand identity that really, I think, describes you, which how much you've been emphasizing and highlighting so much the diversity and inclusivity for the Latin American region?
I think, well, yes, that's a good observation that they are two different magazines. We closed two different magazines. A lot of people, even at Condé Nast, don't know that sometimes. But I think, we're based in Mexico. So obviously it's hard to have like tentacles everywhere. And for budget reasons, we do share a lot of the content. But if there's something, important going on, like for the 25th anniversary, we did a cover that was dedicated to Colombia, a cover with Marta Minujín who's a pop artist, who was one of Warhol's, friends and accomplices in the 70s. We had her cover that was just for Argentina. We had a cover of young Miko, who's a young Puerto Rican actress. And then we had Diego, Eiza, and Gael from Mexico, even though they're global actors. But when we can, we do two different covers. Sometimes, it just depends on how we divide things up. But we obviously count on a lot of different contributors to help us with that, people that are there. Also, we look at digital numbers, and our second biggest traffic audience is Colombia. Mm-hmm. Third is Argentina. Fourth is US. So we kind of focus on those regions.
We have very similar demographics, except the US is our number one and Colombia is our number two.
Yeah, but Mexico's our number one.
Yeah.
And like Mexico City is the number one. But even so, we try and kind of move things around, but it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I wish we could do a shoot in like Bolivia, but it's obviously for budget reasons. Mm-hmm. But now you have we do this thing called Photo Vogue, where we get submissions from around Latin America. We're doing it for the first time this year in Latam. And there's so many submissions from everywhere in Latin America. So that's exciting.
That is exciting. And that you've actually you travel so much, and you travel a lot, not only to Europe and the obvious countries, but also all through the region in Latin America. To all the people listening to us today, you've seen a before and after since the moment that you arrived to the magazine. I think so much has changed in the fashion and beauty and publication industry all over the region, right? What are some of the hopes, now that you've immersed yourself into the culture and the things that Colombia needs versus Mexico versus Peru? What are the hopes that you hope for the region for the next chapter?
Well, I think there's still a lot of I think in the industry as a whole, I think people still see it as kind of this emerging industry that's not fully matured. But I hope that we can give more visibility to designers and photographers and continue this idea that, that Latin America is it's not like a trending thing, mm-hmm. It's not like Bad Bunny is not trending. It's really like that Latinos are a very diverse and interesting group with a lot of amazing talent that are kind of spread around the world, and that there's like actual real talent, and that you don't need to bring in a photographer to shoot in Mexico or in Ecuador. You can find someone there. And I think that's really exciting. And I think, when we think about Hollywood, which is obviously like a big reference point for a lot of people and brands, and there's still a lot of work to be done. If you think about, even I was reading the 100 best books in the past 100 years, there's barely any Latino authors in there. And that's something that I think we have to continue to change. And I hope that people are more open to recognizing different talents. And I think we're getting there. I think, this week that Patricio Campillo showed in New York, and Willie had an amazing show. And there's a lot of space, I think, in New York for young Latino designers to really flourish. think it's very different than Milan and Paris, which is a little bit more of an intimidating space. But I think in New York, people are excited to see young, fresh faces. And I'm happy that it's kind of that in the same way, like it's such a melting pot. I think it's great for like Latinos to come show here.
Yeah, so I agree.
Because we have, I mean, to think about like the thriving culture. Every time I love and hate landing in JFK, but one of the things I love landing about is that you're like in the baggage carousel and you're on a flight from like West Africa, Latin America, Europe. It's just like, which is New York, right?
It is. That's what we love.
And I think it's really welcoming to these designers.
And for all the designers and stylists, creatives that, you've been mentoring through the years, that you've been seeing how they scaled their business. What do you think, other than what you were just telling us, like, what do you think is like, what could we do to help them? Like, what do you think is what they need the most? Like, for example, I can tell you, like, on my end, to help them go be bigger and more successful, I think that they need access to capital. I always say it. Like,
yes.
It doesn't matter if I introduce you to someone. If my advice, you can't afford my advice, it all just stays with that advice.
Exactly. And I think learning those I think because what you guys have done has been so great for designers, because it's what I'm talking about, the formality, the informality. Like in Mexico,
100%.
you have a lot of informal brands, informal businesses. You can be the best cake maker in the world, but if you can't give me a receipt, basic stuff, then I can't buy your cake because I need,
an invoice.
And I need an invoice. And so I think it's those like little things that I think are so important. And, we've talked about this. I had a brand and we didn't know how we were going to produce a J. Crew order for $500,000. We didn't have $500,000, but we had access to a loan, to a fact, and those are things that we learned along the way, because there was not a LAFS in that time. And there was not really anyone that was willing to help you. So I think that's really important to like, for you guys to be that community that supports, where you can go and learn things and you don't have to go through the scrapes and fall.
I always say, like, you need to learn. You need to learn from
the start line.
Learn from from our mistakes. Like, please, like, don't let your mistakes cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Like, ask. People are willing to give that advice. I think it comes down to that. I mean, if we don't give them, and for everybody listening, I always talk about this. Like, if you guys want to, like, right now we're kicking off Latin Heritage Month, and to everyone listening to us today, I always highlight this. Like, if you want to celebrate Latin heritage, the best way to celebrate Latin heritage is you need to allow us to grow and scale our business. And for that, all of these young creatives, they need access to capital.
Yeah.
They need access to a loan. They need access to grants. They need access, like, if not, the amount of impact they could create in the region, or just Latinos in the US, if we would just give them $100,000 loan, they will pay you back.
Yeah,
I'm not asking for a
absolutely.
grant.
I think, and I think in, obviously the smaller countries, it's not possible to access money because it's so expensive to get a loan. So I think really like funds, organizations that help designers grow, I think the Colombian government has done a great job in making Colombia, like El Hecho en Colombia.
Yeah, Colombia and Peru are
so
amazing.
important. I think Mexico is years behind. I don't know, unfortunately, if it's going to get any better. But yeah, I think having a support system, I think, is so important.
Support system is key. Karla, thanks so much.
Gracias,
for
gracias.
being my support system and the support system of so many people listening to us today. Thanks for joining us.
Gracias.